What if the people closest to us left behind a record of their truest thoughts, not in confession, but in the cold glow of a phone screen? What if every unanswered text, every late-night search, every word typed in secret told a story louder than the person who wrote it? August 2018. Frederick, Colorado. A young mother sends a message past midnight, raw, pleading, unanswered. Just days earlier, another set of fingers typed a question into Google, a question that carried more weight than either of them could have imagined. These fragments, texts, lies, and searches are more than data. They are the haunting pulse of a story America still cannot turn away from. A story where silence spoke louder than words, and where the trail left behind on a screen was impossible to erase. Shanann Catherine Watts was 34 years old, born in Clifton, New Jersey, and living with her husband and two little girls in Frederick, Colorado. On Facebook, she shared her life openly, posting videos of Bella, 4 years old, singing to her baby sister, Celeste, just 3. She uploaded family trips, dinner table moments, and affectionate messages to her husband, Chris Watts. To friends, the Watts family appeared to be thriving, the picture of suburban stability. But Shanann's private texts to close friends told a different story. In them, she described feeling unwanted, telling one confidant that Chris barely touched her anymore and that his once gentle nature had turned cold. She worried he was no longer in love with her, and her attempts to rekindle their marriage were often met with indifference. Friends noticed the distance too, but Shanann clung to hope, determined to hold her family together for Bella and Cece, and for the baby boy she was carrying, whom she had already named Nico. In June of 2018, Shanann traveled with Bella and Celeste to North Carolina to spend 6 weeks with her family. She thought the trip would give Chris space, maybe time to reset before the new baby arrived. Instead, it created an opening for betrayal. While Shanann was gone, Chris began an affair with Nicole Kessinger, a coworker at Anadarko Petroleum. Nicole, 30 years old, worked in the environmental department and met Chris on the job. What started as casual conversation quickly escalated into late-night phone calls, frequent texts, and secret meetings that grew more intense as the weeks passed. By July, while Shanann was hundreds of miles away trying to mend her strained marriage through texts and phone calls, Chris was telling Nicole he was planning a new life. Investigators would later uncover that during this time, Nicole searched online for topics like wedding dresses, vacations, and information about Amber Frey, the mistress of convicted murderer Scott Peterson. It was a chilling sign of where her thoughts had drifted, even as Shanann continued to post cheerful updates online, unaware of the affair unraveling her marriage. To the outside world, the Watts family still looked perfect, Chris smiling in photos, Shanann glowing as she held her daughters close. But behind those images, the distance between husband and wife was growing, and the affair Chris tried to keep hidden had already begun to poison the fragile foundation of their marriage. What Shanann believed could be repaired was already breaking beyond her reach. On August 13, 2018, 34-year-old Shanann Watts was restless after returning home from a late business trip to Arizona. She was 15 weeks pregnant with a baby boy she had already named Nico, and her marriage was collapsing around her. At 12:33 a.m., she sent a message to a close friend that read, "Chris told me last night he doesn't want the baby." It was the kind of admission no expectant mother ever expects to put into writing, and it carried the unmistakable weight of betrayal. Later that same night, Shanann confided again, this time to her best friend Nicole Atkinson. Her text was blunt, stripped of hope. He said, "We are incompatible." Nicole knew Shanann as a fighter, someone who believed her family was worth every ounce of effort, and those words alarmed her. She sensed Shanann was slipping into a place of fear and uncertainty she had never voiced so directly before. In those final hours, Shanann continued to reach for her husband. She tried to talk, tried to find any trace of affection or reassurance. Chris Watts responded, but his words carried no tenderness. Investigators later revealed that his texts from that night were brief, often 1 or 2 words, cold acknowledgments without feeling. Shanann, who had once received daily affirmations from her husband, now stared at a screen that gave her nothing but distance. The messages from that night showed a woman still clinging to hope, even when met with rejection. Shanann asked questions, tried to pull him back into conversation, but Chris gave her nothing meaningful in return. To friends who later read those texts, the change in tone was chilling. A man shutting down, a woman begging for connection, and a marriage teetering at its breaking point. Nicole Atkinson would later testify that those messages disturbed her deeply. She promised to check in on Shanann the following day, worried not only about her friend's emotional state, but also her physical health as a pregnant mother under stress. Shanann had leaned on Nicole throughout the summer as Chris grew more distant, but the words she sent in the early hours of August 13th felt different. They read like a warning, like something irreversible was closing in. By dawn, Shanann's phone fell silent. Those final texts, her confession that Chris did not want their son, her admission that he called their marriage incompatible, remained preserved in her digital record. They became more than private messages to trusted friends. They became the last proof of Shanann's heartbreak, the final evidence of a wife reaching for a husband who was already slipping away. And within hours, those words would stand as the closing chapter of her life. On the morning of August 13th, 2018, Chris Watts began sending messages that would later betray him. At 7:40 a.m., he texted his co-worker Cody Roberts, telling him he would go to a remote oil site near Roggen, Colorado. He wrote that he needed to check on a leaking battery tank, and he added that he might be late because of issues at home. At the time, Cody had no reason to doubt him, but investigators would later identify that text as the first attempt Chris made to build a cover for himself. Minutes later, Chris turned to Shanann's phone. At 8:25 a.m., he sent her a message. "If you and the kids are not at home, please let me know where you went." Then again at 9:02 a.m., he followed with another. "Please let me know where you are." These words, typed out as though he were a concerned husband, were sent to a woman who was already dead inside their Frederick home. Investigators later explained that these texts were not genuine attempts to reach his wife. They were digital props, staged to create the illusion of ignorance. The contrast between Chris's words and Shanann's final text from hours earlier could not have been sharper. Shanann had written long, emotional messages to friends, describing her fear that her marriage was collapsing. She confided that Chris had told her he didn't want the baby and that he believed they were incompatible. Chris's replies, now preserved in the discovery file, were stripped of feeling. They were short, detached, and read more like diary notes to police than communication with a wife of 8 years. Meanwhile, Nicole Atkinson, Shanann's best friend, was already growing uneasy. She tried calling Shanann that morning and received no reply. She sent her texts and saw no response. By late morning, Nicole's worry escalated into action. She drove to the Watts house on Saratoga Trail and found Shanann's car still parked in the garage with the car seats inside, but no sign of Shanann, Bella, or Celeste. That detail alone made Chris's staged texts even more suspicious. Shanann had not taken the girls anywhere. She had never left. Detectives later pored over the phone records, noting the careful wording of Chris's messages. He wrote, "Please let me know," instead of "Where are you? I'm worried," avoiding the natural panic of a husband unable to reach his pregnant wife. His co-workers would later testify that Chris seemed calm that day, never showing the urgency one would expect if his family had truly disappeared. Those morning texts became a turning point in the investigation. They showed Chris Watts actively trying to write a false timeline, sending words to a phone he knew could never answer back. And it was that silence, that haunting absence of a reply, that told detectives the truth. Shanann, Bella, and Celeste were already gone, and Chris's texts were not cries of concern. They were the beginning of a cover-up that collapsed under the weight of his own digital trail. When investigators examined Nicole Kessinger's phone and computer, they discovered a trail of searches that told its own story. Nicole, 30 years old, worked in the environmental department at Anadarko Petroleum in Colorado, the same company where Chris Watts was employed. They began seeing each other in late June 2018, and by July, the relationship had grown serious. What she typed into Google in the weeks before the murders gave detectives a timeline that no interview could match. On August 4th, 2018, Nicole searched, "Man I'm having an affair with says he will leave his wife." That same day, she also looked up, "How much do Amber Frey's book deals worth?" Amber Frey, known publicly as the mistress of Scott Peterson, became a central figure in the Lacey Peterson murder case in 2002. Detectives immediately recognized the significance. Nicole was comparing her situation to one of the most infamous family murder cases in recent memory. Her search history also showed repeated entries for wedding dresses, honeymoon destinations, and vacation spots. These were dated throughout late July and early August while Shanann Watts was in North Carolina with her daughters Bella and Celeste. Shanann was sending Chris long, emotional texts, trying to save her marriage. At the same time, Nicole was browsing the internet for the kind of future that suggested she saw herself as part of Chris's permanent life. After Shanann, Bella, and Celeste went missing, Nicole's searches became even more alarming. On August 14, 2018, just one day after the disappearance, Nicole searched, "Can cops trace text messages?" and "How to prepare for an interview with the police." That was the very same day Frederick Police and the FBI interviewed her for the first time. For investigators, it was a red flag. She was already worried about what her digital footprint might reveal. During interviews, Nicole told detectives she believed Chris was in the process of divorcing Shanann. She said he told her the marriage was over and that they were no longer living as husband and wife. But discovery documents confirmed that she deleted entire threads of her messages with Chris after August 13th. Many were later recovered from backups, but the act of erasing conversations made her appear evasive and protective of her role. Detectives also charted the frequency of their communication. In the weeks before the murders, Chris and Nicole called each other multiple times a day, sometimes late into the night. Their conversations grew longer as Chris became more distant from Shanann, and the pattern was clear. His marriage was deteriorating as his affair intensified. Nicole's search history became a key piece of evidence. It showed her curiosity about high-profile cases, her thoughts about a possible future with Chris, and her anxiety once the investigation began. These were not assumptions. They were documented searches, preserved in the discovery file, with dates and times investigators could not ignore. And while Chris Watts sent texts to stage an alibi, Nicole Kessinger's keystrokes revealed the hidden backdrop of the story, one that made it impossible to separate what was happening in the Watts home from what was happening on her screen. When investigators searched Chris Watts's phone and computer, they found entries that would later be used against him in court. The history revealed what he was reading, what he was trying to erase, and what he was planning in the weeks before August 13, 2018. Each search was time-stamped, preserved, and impossible to explain away. One of the most striking discoveries was his interest in Metallica's song Battery. Chris searched for the lyrics, which described domination and destruction. The search came in early August, just days before Shanann returned from her business trip. At the same time Shanann was writing long texts to friends about saving her marriage and preparing for the birth of their son, Nico, Chris was drawn to lyrics that glorified violence. Detectives later noted how different his private focus was from the public image of a happy father he showed on Facebook. He also researched ways to wipe out digital records. In the days before Shanann's death, Chris looked up how to delete Facebook accounts. Shanann's Facebook page had been central to her life. She used it to share photos of Bella and Celeste, to document her excitement about being pregnant, and to write posts celebrating her marriage. Chris's search suggested he was considering how to remove that online presence, even before Shanann returned to Colorado. His browser also showed searches for separation and divorce laws in Colorado. The discovery file confirmed he looked into the legal steps of ending a marriage, including financial consequences. These were not random clicks. They reflected a man weighing his options in private, even as Shanann texted friends that she was still trying to fix their marriage. Chris never mentioned these searches to her directly, but the record showed he was already planning a life on the other side of their relationship. Investigators didn't stop at his phone and laptop. They also pulled GPS data from his Anadarko petroleum work truck. On the morning of August 13, 2018, that data showed Chris leaving his home on Saratoga Trail and driving east toward a company oil site near Roggen, Colorado. At 6:53 a.m., the system logged his truck arriving at the location. He stayed there for over 3 hours before returning. That same site later became the recovery ground for his family. Shanann's body found in a shallow grave, and Bella and Celeste's bodies placed inside 2 separate oil tanks. The GPS record was precise and devastating. It placed Chris exactly where investigators found Shanann, Bella, and Celeste. Combined with his internet searches, the evidence showed intent, planning, and execution. Chris Watts had searched for destruction in music, looked for ways to erase his family's online identity, researched divorce laws he never spoke about, and driven to the site where his wife and daughters were hidden. His words to police were lies, but his digital trail was permanent. And in the end, it was that trail that told the truth. On August 15, 2018, Chris Watts was questioned inside the Frederick Police Department. For hours, he repeated the same story. Shanann had taken Bella and Celeste and left the house while he was at work. He denied knowing where they had gone, insisting he was just as confused as everyone else. But investigators already held evidence that made his version of events impossible. They pointed out that Shanann's purse, phone, and wedding ring were all found inside the home on Saratoga Trail. They noted that her final text message had been sent at 2:30 a.m. on August 13th and that there had been no activity on her phone since. They confronted Chris about his own text messages, the ones he sent to Shanann's phone at 8:25 a.m. and again at 9:02 a.m. on the morning she vanished. He had written as though she were alive, but investigators knew those texts were staged because Shanann never replied. Chris agreed to take a polygraph exam, convinced he could outlast the pressure. The test was administered by Special Agent Tammy Lee of the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. She asked him directly, did he physically cause Shanann's disappearance? Did he lie about the last time he saw her? Did he know where Shanann, Bella, and Celeste were? The machine captured his stress with each denial. When the exam ended, Agent Lee told him clearly, Chris, you did not pass the polygraph test. His calm exterior faltered. Detectives then revealed the most damaging piece of evidence yet. They had pulled GPS data from his Anadarko petroleum work truck. On August 13th, at 6:53 a.m., the truck's records showed Chris arriving at a remote oil site near Roggen, Colorado. He stayed there for more than 3 hours before returning. Investigators told him that his vehicle placed him at the exact location where Shanann's body was later recovered in a shallow grave, and where Bella and Celeste's bodies were found inside 2 oil tanks. The technology left no room for denial. Faced with the evidence, Chris broke. In the presence of investigators, he admitted to killing Shanann in their bedroom after what he described as an argument. He then confessed to smothering his daughters, 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Celeste, before loading all 3 bodies into his work truck. He drove them to the Anadarko oil site, buried Shanann, and placed Bella and Celeste in separate oil tanks. His words were flat, almost detached, but they carried a horror that shook even the detectives who had expected his confession. For 2 days, Chris Watts had insisted Shanann walked out with the children. He had sent staged text messages, stood in front of television cameras, and tried to maintain the image of a worried husband. But confronted with the phone logs, the staged messages, the failed polygraph, and the GPS trail, his story collapsed. The confession that followed was not given freely. It was forced into the open by evidence that spoke louder than his lies. Evidence that traced every step he took from his home in Frederick to the oil field where his family was left behind. The Watts case became one of the clearest examples of how digital evidence can build a timeline that lies cannot erase. Investigators didn't rely on speculation. They relied on text logs, internet searches, call records, and GPS data, all preserved in the devices belonging to Shanann, Chris, and Nicole. Together, those records documented exactly what happened before and after August 13, 2018. Shanann Watts's text messages gave investigators her own voice in the days before her death. On the night of August 12, 2018, she texted her best friend, Nicole Atkinson. Chris told me last night he doesn't want the baby. Hours later, she added, he said we are incompatible. These messages were saved on her phone and backed up through her carrier. They showed a mother of 2, 15 weeks pregnant with a 3rd child, documenting the breakdown of her marriage in real time. Nicole Kessinger's internet history gave investigators another perspective. On August 4, 2018, she searched, "Man I'm having an affair with says he will leave his wife." That same day, she Googled, "How much do Amber Frey's book deals worth?" A direct reference to the mistress of convicted killer Scott Peterson. In the weeks leading up to the murders, she also searched for wedding dresses, honeymoon destinations, and vacation spots. Then, on August 14, 2018, the day after Shanann, Bella, and Celeste were reported missing, Nicole searched, can cops trace text messages? And how to prepare for an interview with the police. Investigators later testified that her activity was preserved in full and reviewed as part of the case file. Chris Watts's own searches revealed his intentions. In early August 2018, he looked up the lyrics to Metallica's song Battery. He also searched how to delete Facebook accounts, even while Shanann was actively posting about her children and her pregnancy. He researched separation and divorce laws in Colorado, examining the possible consequences of ending his marriage. All of this activity was pulled directly from his phone and computer by digital forensic experts. The most damaging evidence came from his work truck. Data taken from the GPS system inside his Anadarko petroleum vehicle showed his exact route on the morning of August 13, 2018. At 6:53 a.m., the system recorded his truck arriving at a remote oil site near Roggen, Colorado. He stayed there until after 9 a.m. That location later became the recovery site for his family. Shanann buried in a shallow grave, and Bella and Celeste found submerged in separate crude oil tanks. The GPS data matched perfectly with the timeline investigators were building and left Chris with no defense. Each of these digital records became a piece of testimony. Shanann's texts documented her fear and heartbreak. Nicole's Google searches revealed knowledge and motive. Chris's own searches showed intent and an effort to cover his tracks. And the GPS from his work truck fixed him to the exact place where Shanann, Bella, and Celeste were left. No matter how carefully Chris Watts tried to erase his steps, his phone, his computer, and his vehicle preserved the truth. Shanann Watts's final messages remain preserved in the official files of the Weld County District Attorney. In the early morning of August 13, 2018, she texted her best friend Nicole Atkinson, telling her that Chris had said he did not want their baby and that he had called them incompatible. Those words were sent just hours before Shanann, 15 weeks pregnant with their son Nico, was killed inside her home on Saratoga Trail in Frederick, Colorado. Nicole Kessinger's Google history also remains part of the public record. On August 4, 2018, she searched, "Man I'm having an affair with says he will leave his wife." That same day she looked up, "How much do Amber Frey's book deals worth?" In the weeks that followed, she browsed wedding dresses, honeymoon destinations, and vacations. On August 14, 2018, one day after Shanann, Bella, and Celeste were reported missing, she searched, "Can cops trace text messages?" and how to prepare for an interview with the police. These entries were documented in the discovery file and reviewed by investigators as they built their case. Chris Watts's own digital trail was equally damning. Forensic analysis showed that in early August 2018, he searched how to delete Facebook accounts. He looked up separation and divorce laws in Colorado. He also searched the lyrics to Metallica's Battery, a song about domination and destruction. Beyond the internet history, investigators pulled GPS data from his Anadarko petroleum work truck. On August 13, 2018, at 6:53 a.m., the system recorded his arrival at a company oil site near Roggen, Colorado. He remained there until after 9 a.m. That was the site where Shanann's body was later recovered in a shallow grave and where Bella and Celeste's bodies were found submerged in separate oil tanks. In November 2018, Chris Watts pleaded guilty in Weld County District Court to 9 felony counts, including the first-degree murders of Shanann, Bella, and Celeste, and the unlawful termination of Shanann's pregnancy with baby Nico. He was sentenced to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus 48 years for the unlawful termination of pregnancy and 36 years for tampering with the bodies. He is serving his sentence at Dodge Correctional Institution in Waupun, Wisconsin, where he will remain for the rest of his life. The case of Chris Watts has become one of the clearest examples of how technology builds timelines. Shanann's texts revealed her heartbreak in her own words. Nicole Kessinger's searches revealed what she knew, what she feared, and what she expected. Chris's searches and GPS data revealed intent, cover-up, and ultimately, guilt. Every text, every call log, every browser entry, and every GPS ping became testimony that could not be silenced. Shanann's last words to her friend, "Chris told me last night he doesn't want the baby," became her testimony in death. And together, those records spoke for Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico, long after Chris Watts tried to take their voices away.